Periods aren't fun for any of us, especially if you have ADHD or autism. But if your emotions are going extra haywire, then there might actually be something a little bit more to it. Hello and welcome to Through the Noise Coaching. My name is Lee and I'm a leadership coach specialised in growing the careers of mid to senior neurospices. And this topic is a little bit outside of the realm that I usually talk about, but it is the third in my series of ADHD, autism and periods. So there's a reason why I'm talking about it. Because when I am coaching, I'm not just coaching the person at work who unpacks themselves from a box and just does work and then packs himself back up at the end of the day and unpacks a different box to be the home then. A person with ADHD or autism or neurodivergence in general is affected by what's going on in their life and can't be compartmentalised into work version and home version. The things that happen outside of work affect us, and so when I'm coaching someone, I'm looking at the whole person in their entirety instead of just what they do every day for work. So for roughly half of the population that have periods, then this is very relevant because it affects them. I've already done a couple of videos on ADHD and periods. The first talking about the theory behind ADHD and periods, and the second looking at the lived experience of people who have ADHD and periods as well to find out what life is actually like for them. But I was missing an important part of the conversation, and that's something that I want to talk about today. It's called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. Now, you may not have heard of PMDD, but you've probably heard of PMS, or premenstrual syndrome, premenstrual stress, whatever you want to call it exactly. Well, PMDD is like PMS turned up to 11. It's bigger, and per the NHS, symptoms of PMDD are similar to PMS but are much more intense and can have a much greater negative impact on your daily activities and quality of life. The reason why I'm talking about it today is because it's not something that's spoken about very much. And in my previous two videos, the papers that I was using didn't touch upon it at all. I didn't find out about it at my ADHD diagnosis, and it wasn't actually until a friend mentioned it to me that I even knew that it existed at all. And having researched it, you won't be surprised to hear, given the topic of this video, that PMDD occurs much more frequently in people with ADHD and autism than it does the general population. Woohoo! So today I'm going to take you through what PMDD is, as well as some of the scientific studies and information around it, and actually one of them turns up something that does actually help and make it a little bit better. So we're going to deep dive into that. So without further ado, let's get into the topic. To start with, I want to take a look at the definition of PMDD in the DSM-5, and I have to put the usual disclaimer here. I'm not here to diagnose anyone with anything. You should definitely talk to your healthcare provider if you think you might have PMDD, but what I can do is share the information of what's already out there, so let's do that. The definition starts with the following sentence. In the majority of menstrual cycles, at least 5 symptoms must be present in the final week before the onset of menses, start to improve within a few days of the onset of menses, and become minimal or absent in the week post-menses. Now, the language is pretty confusing. It says that one or more of the following list of symptoms must be present, and there's 2 lists of symptoms, and there must be at least 5 total present. The way I interpreted that is that you must have a symptom from each group at least, and there must be 5 there in total. So let's take them group by group. The first group looks like this. 1, marked affected lability, so things like mood swings, suddenly sad, tearful, or increased sensitivity to rejection. 2, marked irritability or anger or increased interpersonal conflicts. 3, marked depressed moods, feeling of hopelessness or self-deprecating thoughts. 4, marked anxiety, tension, and or feelings of being keyed up or on edge. And then the second group, 1, decreased interest in usual activities like work, school, friends, hobbies. 2, subjective difficulty in conversation. 3, lethargy, easy fatigability, that's a good word, fatigability, or marked lack of energy. 4, marked change in appetite, overeating, or specific food cravings. 5, hypersomnia or insomnia. 6, a sense of being overwhelmed or out of control. 7, physical symptoms such as breast tenderness or swelling, joint or muscle pain, a sensation of bloating or weight gain. And with that, I can already see things like rejection sensitivity, emotional dysregulation, executive dysfunction, all that kind of stuff that overlaps with ADHD. But they say that this must have occurred for most mentees within the past year in order to have a diagnosis. The symptoms have to cause significant distress and interfere with things like work, family, life, just in general, and get in the way. They can't be caused by an exacerbation of another mood disorder. They must be observed for 2 periods in order to have a good enough observation, and it can't be caused by, say, drug use, medication, or any other kind of medical condition there. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the research published about PMDD and autism and ADHD. So we're going to start off with one 2021 paper called Prevalence of Hormone-Related Mood Disorder Symptoms in Women with ADHD. This looks at PMDD, postpartum depression and climacteric mood symptoms in women with ADHD. It begins by acknowledging that women with ADHD experience much more depression and anxiety than both men with ADHD and women that don't have ADHD at all. The depression and anxiety tends to last for longer periods, and also that it tends to fluctuate a little bit more with hormones. So they decided to look into this a little bit further. So they did a study made up of patients of the PsyQ outpatient clinics in The Hague in the Netherlands. They had all their participants meeting the DSM-4 criteria for ADHD, and the mean age was 34.5. Much like for the DSM-5 definition of PMDD, they had their participants take a questionnaire and look for things like changes in mood, concentration, all that kind of stuff that's on the PMDD diagnostic criteria. As a point of comparison, the study did a meta-analysis of general studies of PMDD and found that the incidence tends to be somewhere between 23 and 31% of the general population, with about a 28.7% average. But actually in their study, for people with ADHD, they found it to be much higher at 45.5%. They say we do need to apply some caution when comparing these numbers directly, however. One reason is because they only track this through one cycle instead of the recommended 2 cycles, but also the fact that this group were psychiatric patients already means that they might have more severe symptoms. And it's not clear in the paper whether they mean more severe PMDD symptoms or more severe ADHD symptoms here. They also split the ADHD groups into 2, a PMDD group and a non-PMDD group. And one of the things they examined was actually the use of hormonal contraceptives, and found that the PMDD group were using far less hormonal contraceptive than the non-PMDD group. So that's actually about 50% of people in the PMDD group were taking hormonal contraceptives versus about 68%. And the reason why people were taking hormonal contraceptives in the PMDD group was actually because of the premenstrual syndromes, which was a much lower reason given in the non-PMDD group. They also found that using hormonal contraceptives was associated with a lower number of PMDD symptoms, and actually using antidepressants was correlated with a higher number of PMDD symptoms. And this kind of correlates with, if you look at the NHS website for PMDD, they actually do suggest hormonal contraceptive as something to help with that. Although they also suggest antidepressants, which this article didn't find to be very effective. So if you are struggling with PMDD, then hormonal contraceptives is definitely something to look at and maybe try. Moving away from ADHD and onto autism now, we're going to look at the following study: Prevalence of Premenstrual Syndrome in Autism, a prospective observer-rated study. And this study is impressive because of the lengths it goes to account for other things that might be impacting or confounding the results here. And in fact, I've not actually seen a study like this before, because the premise is it wants to compare autistics against allistics, or people who don't have autism, but actually instead of just comparing a general autistic against a general non-autistic person, it's actually looking specifically at those with learning disabilities on both sides, so that potential comorbidity of learning disabilities aren't affecting the autistic population in the sample. Well, they are, but they're affecting both sides of the population in the sample. And this makes sense because there is a significant overlap between autism and learning disabilities. And so in other studies, it's not quite clear whether the thing being observed or the conclusion is caused by autism itself or by the comorbid learning disability. So by looking at populations that both have learning disabilities, they're actually controlling for this. On top of this, they also match participants in a number of categories such as age, marital status, ethnicity, behavioural problems, loads of categories here that I can't remember off the top of my head. And they looked at them for a full 3 cycles instead of just 1, so that they could see some consistency over time. Note at this point that none of the participants were using hormonal contraceptives at all, and there also were no comorbid psychiatric disorders or anything like that. They had labs done and all that kind of stuff, and yeah, there was nothing there that could be a potential issue in the study. Midway through recording the video, my little table here has just collapsed, and I don't really want to go through setting it up again. So if I just put this ukulele here, there, that's pretty, right? Back to the video. Independent observers were used to monitor the PMDD symptoms, and what's important is that they were blind to the person's autism diagnosis or what they were even really looking for. They didn't know the purpose of the study or anything like that. The results were actually quite shocking. They found that 92% of the autistic population had PMDD versus 11% of the control group, which is huge, and it blows my mind that we're not talking about this more. However, this is one of those cases where different studies vary significantly. This study was done in 2008. A separate study in 2016 found that the numbers are actually more like 21% of autistic versus 3% of the general population. However, when you compare the numbers of 21% and 3%, that difference is still huge. You don't need me to tell you that. However, a third more recent paper from 2022, which has the very punny title, Menstruation and Menopause in Autistic Adults, Periods of Importance, found the PMDD rate to be 14.3% in autistics versus 9.3% in the general population, which does close the gap. However, one thing I will note is that neither of these two papers with smaller rates mention anything about hormonal contraceptives, and it seems that hormonal contraceptives based on the ADHD paper and NHS guidelines make a huge difference. So that is something that potentially could be causing the differences in results between different papers. Regardless of the fact that the number keeps going down, that even if we take the lowest at 14.3%, this is still a significant number of autistic people that are struggling with PMDD symptoms. Now, I was all over Google Scholar searching ADHD and PMDD, autism and PMDD, and variations of the two, and there really isn't much research done on this topic at all. However, I did manage to stumble across a paper in pre-publication that I could only read the abstract of. To be honest, this is just based on the abstract, and it looked at whether women who are diagnosed with PMDD are actually more likely to have ADHD. The abstract indicated that they did actually find this result. They found that women with PMDD were more likely to have ADHD and actually higher inattentive symptoms, which implies that there's a two-way link here. And so this two-way link could be incredibly important to future research in this area. So that's it for today. I'm sorry I couldn't go into more detail about this. The research just isn't really there to support it at this point, but I'm hoping the fact that it's starting means that it inspires a lot more research in this area continues to grow. The main takeaway that I can give you is that if you are experiencing PMDD symptoms, then based on the first paper we talked about today and NHS guidelines, giving hormonal contraceptive a try might be something that's really useful, but please do talk to your medical professional. I'm not a medical professional, so please do talk to a medical professional, your doctor, to get some advice regarding that. On that note, I am now done with the topic of menstruation and we'll be back onto careers in general from next week. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.